Imagine you're driving down the highway at like 70 miles an hour. You are staring obsessively at your dashboard, just checking the fuel gauge, monitoring the engine heat, making sure your speed is exactly at the limit.
Right, completely focused inward.
Exactly. But you are completely ignoring the windshield. You're not looking at the traffic, the lanes, or the weather. And no matter how perfectly your engine is running, you are going to crash.
Yeah, it's a terrifying visual, honestly.
It really is. Today, we're looking at a stack of research that suggests most of us are driving through our lives doing exactly that. Or, well, worse, staring out the windshield while the engine catches fire.
It's an incredibly accurate metaphor when we talk about emotional intelligence. Because, for decades, there's been this persistent myth that emotional intelligence, or EQ, is essentially just a genetic lottery.
Right, like you either have it or you don't.
Exactly. Like you're either born as this deeply grounded, highly empathetic guru who instinctively knows how to handle people, or you're just not. We've treated it like a singular, unchangeable personality trait.
And that myth is exactly what we are dismantling today. Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a fascinating stack of sources to go through today, including excerpts from Cultivating the Mirror, The Architecture of Emotional Intelligence, and The Social Intelligence Blueprint.
Yeah, and the consensus across all these texts is actually incredibly liberating.
It really is. Emotional intelligence isn't some mysterious aura. It is composed of two distinct, highly complementary skills, and the best part, absolutely anyone can develop them.
Right. Those two foundational pillars are self-awareness and social awareness. When you break EQ down into these two separate mechanics, it shifts the entire conversation. It's no longer about altering your fundamental personality. It's about cultivating specific actionable lenses through which you view the world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because genuinely understanding the difference between these two pillars is going to fundamentally change how you process your next big disagreement, or honestly, even just your next highly stressful afternoon.
Absolutely.
But before we talk about how to improve these skills, we need to define the mechanics of what they actually are.
Yeah. So the cleanest way the research divides them is by the direction of your focus. Let's start with self-awareness. This is the practice of looking inward. It's your capacity to actively recognize your own thoughts, your physiological emotions, your limitations, and most importantly, the core values that are secretly driving your choices.
So an internal audit.
Yes, exactly. This inward audit is the absolute foundation of genuine confidence.
And just to clarify for everyone, when these texts talk about confidence, they aren't talking about arrogance or hyping yourself up in a mirror, right?
Okay, no, exactly. What's fascinating here is the distinction the sources make about where confidence actually originates. True confidence isn't built on external praise or, racking up achievements. It's built on rigorous, honest, reality testing of yourself. When you understand your own internal mechanisms, you stop relying on external validation to tell you what you're worth.
So if true confidence comes from that inner audit, it completely changes how you make choices under pressure. You aren't just reacting to the loudest voice in the room or making a snap decision based on a spike in adrenaline. You're acting intentionally.
Precisely. Now, shift your focus in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
That brings us to the second pillar, which is social awareness. This is looking outward. And I want to be clear, this goes far beyond just hearing the words someone is saying.
Right, it's not just listening.
No, social awareness is about pattern recognition. It's noticing the nonverbal cues, calibrating the tone of voice, and understanding complex group dynamics, which are essentially the unwritten, invisible rules governing whatever room you happen to be standing in.
Like reading the room.
Yes. At its core, social awareness is the continuous recognition that everyone you interact with is operating from a unique, complex life story that you likely know nothing about.
There is a brilliant analogy in The Architecture of Emotional Intelligence that really crystallizes how these two interact. The author says that self-awareness helps you understand your inner compass, while social awareness helps you map the landscape around you.
That's a perfect way to put it.
You need both to actually navigate.
It's a perfect metaphor. I mean, a compass is useless if you don't know there's a mountain blocking your path.
Right.
And a map of the landscape doesn't help if you don't know which direction you're currently facing.
Which brings me back to the car analogy I mentioned earlier. Self-awareness is checking your dashboard to make sure you have the fuel and the stability to keep going. Social awareness is looking out the windshield to see what the traffic is doing, or if the light just turned red.
Yeah.
You can't just stare at the dashboard, and you can't ignore the fuel gauge to only look out the window.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, applying both of these views completely alters the physiological mechanics of our everyday interactions.
How so?
Well, the social intelligence blueprint uses the example of a heated disagreement with a colleague. Let's say tensions are rising. If you only look at the dashboard, your self-awareness, you recognize the physical signs of your own frustration.
You feel your own reactions.
Right. You notice your heart rate elevating, your jaw clenching.
Yeah.
Because you see your engine overheating, you can consciously choose to take a breath instead of snapping defensively.
You intervene in your own limbic response before it hijacks your brain.
Yes, exactly. But that only stops you from making things worse. To actually resolve the issue, you need to look out the windshield.
Ah, social awareness.
That is your social awareness kicking in. It allows you to analyze the data coming from the other person. You notice they aren't just angry, their shoulders are slumped, their speech is rushed.
So they might just be overwhelmed.
Right, you realize they are acting out because they are exhausted or under immense pressure from another project. When you synthesize both data points, your own regulated state and their dysregulated state, you don't just stop a fight. You create an opportunity for genuine, productive connection.
I love how mechanical that makes it sound. We need the dashboard, we need the windshield. But, I mean, in reality, human beings are rarely perfectly balanced. What happens when someone is highly optimized in one area, but completely deficient in the other?
Cultivating the mirror introduces another incredibly helpful visual for this exact scenario: a bicycle.
Okay, a bicycle.
Think of self-awareness and social awareness as the two wheels of a bike. If both wheels are inflated, you glide. But if one wheel is robust and fully inflated while the other is flat, your journey isn't just bumpy.
It's a disaster.
Right. It requires an agonizing amount of energy just to keep moving, and you are constantly on the verge of losing your balance.
Let's break down what that uneven bicycle actually looks like in practice, because the texts paint some very recognizable portraits. Let's start with the person who has a massive front wheel, so incredibly strong self-awareness, but a totally flat back wheel of social awareness.
This is the hyper-individualist. They know their personal goals intimately. They have done the therapy. They understand their boundaries. They're aggressively focused on their own personal growth.
But they completely misread the room.
Totally blind to it.
It's like the manager who has read every leadership book and knows exactly what their personal KPIs are, but decides to announce a major company restructuring at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday.
Oh, wow, yes.
They are operating flawlessly according to their own internal schedule, completely blind to the panic they just caused.
Exactly. They dominate conversations because they assume their internal revelations are universally applicable. They offer unsolicited analytical advice when a friend really just needed to vent and feel heard.
So they mean well.
Yeah. The tragedy here is that this persona rarely has malicious intent. They genuinely think they are helping, but because they lack the outward data, they come across as entirely self-absorbed.
Right, because their windshield is totally blacked out. They're just admiring their own dashboard. Okay, let's flip it. What happens to the person with a massive back wheel, incredible social awareness, but a completely deflated front wheel of self-awareness?
This is a much more insidious trap. This is the ultimate people pleaser.
Oh, man.
Yeah. This person can walk into a room and instantly read the barometric pressure of the group's mood. They are deeply empathetic, constantly scanning the environment to see what others need, anticipating conflicts before they even happen.
They're usually the glue keeping a family or a team together.
They are, but the internal cost is devastating. Because they are exclusively tuned into the frequency of others, they habitually say yes when every physiological signal in their body is screaming no.
They ignore their dashboard.
They've completely stopped checking it.
Yeah.
They no longer ask the most fundamental question of survival, which is, what do I need right now?
Wait, hold on. I'm stuck on this idea of the people pleaser. I feel like we usually call those people selfless.
We do.
In a corporate setting, they're the team players. In a family, they're the saints. Society practically throws parades for the person who puts everyone else first. Are these sources really arguing that putting others first is a flaw?
It is a profound misconception,
Yep.
and the research attacks it directly. Caring for yourself isn't a selfish act. It is a prerequisite for sustainability.
Okay, explain that.
Think about the mechanics of it. If your decisions are constantly calibrated to what others expect, need, or approve of, you slowly erode your own sense of identity. You sever the connection to your own core values. And when that happens, your ability to support others becomes incredibly fragile because it is no longer rooted in strength. It's rooted in pure emotional exhaustion.
Ah, right. It's the classic, put your own oxygen mask on first roll.
Precisely. The social intelligence blueprint uses a very stark phrase. You cannot pour endlessly from an empty cup.
Hmm.
If you don't maintain that internal audit, that self-awareness, cognitive and emotional burnout isn't just a risk, it is a biological inevitability.
You literally run out of gas on the highway because you refuse to look at the fuel gauge.
Exactly.
Okay, so an uneven bicycle leads to either unintentional insensitivity or catastrophic burnout. The obvious next question is, how do we fix the bike? Let's start with the front wheel. How do we forge this inner mirror and actually practice self-awareness without it becoming another overwhelming chore on our to-do list?
Well, the good news across all these texts is that building these skills isn't about grand, sweeping life changes. It's about small, highly specific daily habits. The first scientifically backed practice they recommend is journaling.
Right.
But we need to clarify what that means. This isn't about writing poetic, perfect sentences for a memoir. It is simply about externalizing your internal loops.
The sources highlight some very tactical questions you can use. You don't just write, oh, I had a bad day. You ask yourself, what specifically drained my energy today? What matters most to me right now? And my personal favorite is, my current behavior actually align with the values I claim to hold?
That last question is brilliant because it forces reality testing. By moving those thoughts from the emotional centers of your brain onto a physical piece of paper, you engage the language and logic centers.
It pulls you out of the emotional spiral.
Yeah, it physically slows your brain down and breaks the echo chamber of anxiety.
That makes a lot of sense. The text also leans heavily into mindfulness, specifically recommending a strict rule of just 10 to 15 minutes of tech-free quiet every single day.
Yes, no phones, no podcasts playing in the background, no screens. Just sitting and noticing your own baseline. Noticing your breathing, your racing thoughts, and your physical sensations without immediately trying to label them as good or bad.
Which, let's be honest, sounds peaceful, but is actually incredibly difficult to tolerate at first.
Oh, it is deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people. But what it does mechanically is profound. It trains your brain to create a literal neurological gap between a stimulus like an emotion hitting you and your reaction to it.
So you have time to choose your reaction.
Exactly. You are giving your prefrontal cortex a buffer zone to catch up to your amygdala. You learn to observe the feeling first, rather than just acting it out.
It also shifts how you process failure. Cultivating the mirror talks about changing your internal monologue after a misstep. Instead of asking that heavy-loaded question, why did I fail? Which, usually just prompts your brain to generate a list of your insecurities.
Right, it's a trap.
Yeah, you shift the prompt to, what specific data can this experience teach me?
It reframes the mistake from a character flaw to an information gathering exercise.
There's also this beautiful detail from the text about nature that I thought was fascinating. It points out that nature operates on a totally different rhythm than our modern lives. Trees don't rush their growth. Rivers don't force their way forward, they navigate the path of least resistance. The text argues that just being in an environment that isn't demanding your immediate reaction creates the cognitive space required to hear your own inner compass.
It's known as soft fascination. Nature holds your attention without draining your cognitive resources, which is the perfect environment for that tech-free reflection we just talked about.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I hear all of this, the journaling, analyzing my behavior, sitting in silence with my thoughts. But if I sit down to journal, it often just turns into an audit of every awkward thing I said that day.
Yeah, the cringe reel.
Right. So isn't there a massive risk that this quest for self-awareness just devolves into toxic self-criticism? How do we look inward without just spiraling into anxiety?
That is the most critical hurdle in this entire process, and the source material addresses it head-on. True self-awareness only grows in the presence of curiosity, never under the weight of harsh judgment.
Curiosity versus judgment. Explain what that shift actually feels like.
Well, judgment says, I snapped at my coworker today. I'm a terrible leader who can't handle stress.
Ouch.
Right. But curiosity says, I snapped at my coworker today. That's out of character. I wonder what physiological or emotional triggers caused me to react that way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you have to become a gentle, objective observer of your own mechanics. You have to learn to accept your flaws with the exact same compassion and patience you would readily offer a close friend.
That's powerful.
The ultimate realization of self-awareness is understanding that you do not need to be perfect to be confident. You just need to be willing to investigate yourself honestly.
So it's about treating yourself like a fascinating science experiment rather than a defendant on trial. I love that. Okay, so we've patched up the front wheel of our bicycle. We're looking inward with compassionate curiosity. We're checking the dashboard. How do we inflate the back wheel? How do we look out the windshield and tune into the frequency of others to build social awareness?
It starts with an upgrade to the most basic tool we have, which is active listening. And we need to elevate the discourse beyond just put your phone away.
The sources are pretty ruthless about this. They point out that in most interactions, people aren't actually conversing. They're just waiting for their turn to speak.
And there's a biological reason for that. Our brains process information incredibly fast, much faster than the average person speaks.
Okay.
So, while someone is talking, your brain has excess processing power, and it gets bored. It uses that extra capacity to formulate your reply, draft your counterargument, or relate their story back to yourself.
Which means you aren't actually listening to them anymore. You're listening to the voice in your own head.
Exactly. Active listening requires you to consciously manage that cognitive load. It means dedicating your full, undivided attention to the incoming data without drafting your response. You simply absorb.
That's harder than it sounds.
It is. But when people feel genuinely heard, when they realize you aren't just mining their words for an opportunity to jump in with your own anecdote, trust is built almost instantaneously.
The texts also dive deep into reading contextual body language. We all know we should pay attention to nonverbal cues, but the sources put a massive warning label on making quick judgments. You might see someone smiling, but that smile could be a masking behavior for deep exhaustion. Or you see someone with crossed arms, and you instantly assume they are defensive and closed off.
When in reality, the air conditioning might just be turned up too high and they are freezing.
Exactly.
The social intelligence blueprint emphasizes that social awareness is about pattern recognition, not treating body language like a definitive cheat code. You have to establish a baseline for that person. A single isolated gesture rarely tells the truth. You must look at the broader context, the environment, and shifts in their normal behavior before you draw a conclusion.
And that ties perfectly into how the texts define empathy. There are these striking examples of invisible struggles. You might be at a coffee shop, and the cashier is moving slowly or seems distracted. Your instinct is to get annoyed because it's inconveniencing you. But you don't know they were up all night with a sick child. Or you see your incredibly polite neighbor every morning, but you don't know they are secretly navigating a devastating grief. Empathy is the active realization that everyone around you is carrying a heavy story that you cannot see.
And here's the most liberating part about practicing empathy. It does not mean you are required to fix their problems.
Oh, that's huge.
It doesn't even mean you have to agree with their worldview or validate their logic. Empathy simply means acknowledging their fundamental humanity. Empathy isn't about solving someone's problem. It's about giving them permission to have the problem in the first place.
Wow.
Sometimes profound social awareness is just looking at someone who is struggling, saying, that sounds incredibly difficult, and leaving it right there.
So what does this all mean? If I'm managing my cognitive load to actively listen to every word, and I'm scanning for behavioral baselines, and I'm trying to remain hyper-aware of the invisible traumas of the barista and the neighbor, I mean, aren't I just going to become an anxious, projecting mind reader? Won't I just walk around assuming everyone is secretly miserable?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact trap highly empathetic people fall into. They take on the weight of the world by trying to guess what everyone is hiding. But the source material is explicitly clear. True social awareness is not about playing detective. It is the exact opposite of making assumptions.
How does that work in practice?
It works through the mechanism of the pause. Social awareness is the discipline of pausing before you reach a conclusion. Instead of assuming you know the trauma driving someone's bad mood, you actively ask yourself, what information might I be missing right now?
So you stay curious.
You remain open. You don't project. You investigate gently. Instead of asking closed-ended questions, you ask, how did that situation impact you? And crucially, advanced social awareness means respecting their boundaries if they choose not to answer. You open the door for connection, but you never force them to walk through it.
So you aren't trying to read their mind. You're just leaving the space open for them to show you who they are if and when they are ready.
Exactly. It is radical curiosity combined with deep respect.
Which brings us to the ultimate payoff. When you patch the front wheel and inflate the back wheel, when self-awareness and social awareness are operating in tandem, that is where the real transformation happens. When you know yourself deeply through that internal audit, You become genuinely authentic. You don't have to wear masks or contort yourself to please the room because your core values are secure.
And simultaneously, understanding the complexities of others makes you deeply compassionate. The two skills keep each other in perfect equilibrium. With both wheels functioning, you have the capacity to set firm, healthy boundaries without becoming cold or aggressive. And you can offer profound kindness to others without sacrificing your own identity in the process.
Yeah.
You can fiercely protect your own dashboard while fully appreciating the landscape through the windshield.
And as all these texts remind us, you don't just achieve this and graduate. This is a lifelong daily practice. You are not going to ride a perfectly balanced bicycle every single day. There will be days you crash.
Oh, definitely.
But progress in emotional intelligence isn't measured by achieving some mythical state of perfection. It is measured simply by your willingness to wake up, audit your mistakes with curiosity rather than judgment, and try again tomorrow.
Every single interaction, every misunderstanding, every quiet moment of reflection, they aren't tests you pass or fail. They are just data points. They are opportunities to practice the mechanics.
Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, applying everything we've unpacked today. Think about the person in your life who frustrates you the most right now, the one who really gets under your skin. Got them in your head.
We all have one.
Now ask yourself, are you lacking the social awareness to see the hidden, invisible struggles that might be driving their difficult behavior? Or are you lacking the self-awareness to understand why their specific behavior triggers your own insecurities so deeply? Exploring the honest answer to that question might just change the entire dynamic of that relationship.
That is a remarkably powerful lens to look through. It shifts the power back to what you can actually control.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and sharing your time to explore these incredible sources with us. Keep checking that dashboard, keep scanning out that windshield, and most importantly, enjoy the ride. We'll catch you next time.